player Will.
Hey, welcome back, Visions fans. Ready Player Will here. Today, this is the Young Eld character review and brand new unit released to global here. Pretty standard stuff. The character overview, base and total stat analysis, all leading up to the report card where we can look at those stats relative to other units, give some context to why I think they are where they are, look at general thoughts to capture some big, quick hit thoughts about Eld when they'll move into the passives, the counters, the job abilities, just to get a closer look at what capabilities he has, where I think his strengths are in equipments. We'll look at the TMR for a quick review, and then the job-based division card eligibility, weapon optimization, and a sample build, which unfortunately at this time is not 100% complete, but I will be doing an Eld showcase soon where I can hopefully make up for that. Right now, WOTV stats is not updated with his info, and stuff's not loading correctly, so for now I'm just going to gloss over that a little bit, but I do have an in-game build I'm going to share, and then we'll talk about the Truststones. So, kicking things off, again, brand new water unit added here to Global. They give him the unique main job of King Lion Lancer with Paladin and Trick Lancer subjobs as well. He does equip spears with helm armors and accessories, so a little bulkier of a unit overall. Does have a move of 3, jump of 1 as a 100 cost unit, and the faith stat recommendation is definitely 50 for me. There's not a lot of status effects that you're really going to be relying on. And I don't think the extra damage upside that he would take from magic units is really worth it, but if you are pairing him with an external healer, his health pool is big enough that, yeah, you might want to get that faith stat up to 70 just to amplify those external heals, but it's really team specific. And I say that because he's got enough magic resistance innately that you can probably afford a little bit extra on the magic damage side, but definitely debatable. But for the job capabilities now, the max range of his main job is 5 squares away. He's got 2 AoE and 2 unit resistance scaling attack types, so pretty balanced there. From a weapon type resistance standpoint, 20% to magic is actually his strongest, 15% to slash is next, 10% to strike, neutral to pierce at 0, and only minus 5% to missile. Now, not being a 97 faith unit, for the majority of time, you don't have to be too worried about status ailments, but 50% to sleep and 50% to berserk are two certainly very current ones, where we see the Vega TMR being used for berserk all the time, and the sleep obviously from Helen of the Black Rose, from Grifford, from, God, I feel like there's been like 2 or 3 units come out lately that Melnia is another that have sleep access that he has 50% innately, and then 10% to blind. Now for the mastery ability, they gave him unit res of 10 and reaction block rate of 20, and they doubled up on the unit res for the dream ability that if when you upgrade him to 140, he gets another 15 unit res and 15 healing power, which is great for some of his innate kit and how he absorbs damage in his bulk, and that's the whole healing conversation I was just having about how much he receives externally. That will certainly help it. So overall, some decent things here from the mastery ability and the 140. Now, from the base stat analysis, definitely skews much higher on the base stat perspective from an HP analysis, way above the 75th percentile. He is in good company here amongst some of the highest health pools in the game, which is typically reserved for the tank type units, and he is borderline in that effective HP, as we'll talk about later. But from a base attack perspective, also in the upper echelon of what's available. He's one of the top base attack units in the game. Definitely gets to very, very high attack levels when properly equipped for it. From a base agility perspective, just a step above average and what the median is, not by much though. Base agility is not the end of the story, but 57 is certainly a nice starting spot. The base dexterity, also a really strong starting spot here. Now, the thing with dexterity is there's a ton of outlier characters in the game that normally the missile units just have a bonkers amount of base dexterity that the stats actually exclude them from calculating median and percentiles, and Eld is still, despite that, very much in the upper echelon of what you can get to for base dexterity. It certainly does help his overall crit rate, which is a major part of his damage output. A little bit on his counter ability. It's really sprinkled in throughout his kit, so they did a good job here with the base dex. And base luck also is definitely above average. It's not stellar, but definitely above average here, above the 75th percentile. He follows a trend of many units that start off with a really good base luck, and that does end up helping his accuracy, all things considered. But as we look at the total stat analysis, kind of transforming those charts into one to look at where they fall relative compared to all units. Again, really, really strong base stats in all 5 of the major categories. This is very abnormal, to be honest. You don't see many characters start this high in them. From a total stat perspective, a couple things fall to earth, mainly the attack stat here, but HP to a degree as well. But all things considered, even total stats are pretty nice. Maybe a step back on the dexterity and luck too, just from what they give him from the stats here, but it's overall still a good picture, and the base stats are really the most important thing about these characters. So that graph on the top left really tells a very rosy Story. Now let's look at the agility, what he can potentially get to. He does not have any passives that he can equip to amplify his agility. He comes in at 80, just a little bit higher, but basically at 80. And so when you look at where he falls in the groupings of characters, he's basically average, almost exactly on the average when you consider characters with passives. So neither a strength nor weakness, but just average, which many characters are nowadays. This is also a recurring trend. When we look at the crit hit and crit avoid, now innate critical hit rate, despite the very high base dexterity, one of the things they do not do is give him any crit rate board nodes, which they do for many damage dealers. He is not one of them. And so most damage dealers, they get, I don't know, anywhere from like 15 to 20 maybe extra crit rate to bump them up the chart here. He does not, but there is something very important to remember. He's got a main passive that's got a 40 defense pet on it that is also 25 crit rate, that when you have that equipped, he jumps up here to the higher part of the list. So if you have that equipped, you know, this absolutely is very much above average for that critical hit rate. And the crit avoidance, it may look low here, but it's basically average, neither good nor bad. The base luck is nice, but doesn't really do anything to help the overall critical avoidance rate. Now look at the accuracy. This is another very interesting conversation. His base accuracy is, it's average, but his main passive you'll have on all the time is 25% accuracy. So he does end up right on the bottom edge here of like the B tier, or really just like more consistently accurate units. But here's the kicker. He does have a second accuracy passive, which you may not have equipped all the time, really only recommended for the harsh evade metas you might see. When you do equip that on him, though, he is a top 5 most accurate unit in the game. And I have good news. A lot of characters, it's not feasible to equip both passives and pull this off. He's actually a character who can. So really excited to talk about that soon. From an evasion perspective, at the very bottom of what could potentially be considered evade, he's basically at the numerical average, but all things considered, not a strong evade unit. As we get to the report card here now, overall effective HP is an A+. He is right there at the top of the charts for effective HP. Grifford is an S tier above every other DPS, but Eld is right there with Faris for what is considered the highest effective HP for non-tank units. He's got 14 defense innately, no spirit, 15 AoE resistance innately. You can get 15 more on a weapon when you're above a certain threshold. He's got 25 unit res, as we already saw. You get another 8 if you wanted on the dragon armor, which is a lance or spear oriented piece of equipment. Innately speaking, in addition to that very, very high HP level and just some of those very positive resist, that only missile is the negative, effective HP ends up being amongst top of the charts. Now survivability is also an A here in my opinion. His main teammate buff is 20 AoE res to himself and teammates. He's got a mini honeycomb barrier as well, that when damage comes at 7 squares away, it's a 10% damage reduction. It gets smaller over time, but to have that permanently for some of these maps is certainly nice. He's got a 5,000 general damage HP barrier, so both physical and magic. He's also got re-raise on his main buff. He's got 15 healing power innately, and his main ability he'll use all the time is a 30% damage absorption ability. So he definitely has the capability to, siphon back some of that health. His counter ability also can do the same. So survivability-wise, I really like a lot of the things that they've done here for him, where when you combine the effective HP with all these tools, ends up just working really, really well. Now, damage perspective, I'm going to go for an A here. He's got a huge potential attack stat. He's got limited pierce res pen potential, though, and that's really where this grade would suffer, is if, let's be frank, you stacked a ton of pierce resistance, which there really isn't any penetration for, then yes, his damage can go from an A to an F. That's without saying. But all things considered, he's got a 38% imperil on his limit break. He's got physical barrier break on his main damaging ability. Easy 100 defense pen if you really wanted to. So in terms of tank busting potential, definitely there. That ability I was just talking about too is a double hit. So he's got some chain capability with water types or pierce type attacks. Overall though, damage though, very happy with this. I think an A is a good spot. Agility going with a C here though. As we said, very much average. He does not have any passives, but when compared to characters with the passives, he's like right there with them. He does have a CT down ability though, which can kind of even the turn order, and his limit break is also a CT up ability. So I'm keeping him at the C here, even though he's 1 point below the average technically, at least with passives. Now accuracy, going with a B+ here, but with that asterisk. He does have above average accuracy. The 25% at least is always on. That's a definite. He has maybe the extra 25% should you want it. He's got an extra 30% hit chance on his main ability. That's not even considering other kinds of buffs like the Summer Glaciella aura that gives 40% accuracy to nearby teammates. Overall accuracy, I'm going a little bit lower here because I don't think you'll often have both accuracy passives on, but if you did, this is an A+. Definite A+ if you have both passives on. Now for the evasion, going with a C-, good base luck, but that's about it. Really nothing else in the kit that would yield any evasion upside. The movement is also a D, no movement altering options whatsoever. The auto ease of use, going with an A here. He's got some great AI to buff with because he's got re-raise on that teammate buff, so it will not repeat. There's not a lot of buffs on the Subjobs to really confuse things in terms of AI priorities, so I do think he's a potential TMR option because I don't think it's really any strong Subjob buffs. And lots of survivability built in that you can plug and play him pretty easily in a variety of teams. Now the game disruption, I'm going to go with a B+ here. It could be good. It really depends on how much everyone buys into him. I think people are really spent on Vizior for holovision things at the moment, for characters, for the Nier Automata release. So I think this B+ is probably a little overinflated for what will actually occur. And that's purely from a spend perspective, not from an analysis perspective. From an analysis perspective, I think he's a B+. I think he could really do stellar in the game at the moment, but he is a permanent pool unit, so a lot of people are going to pass on him, so you may not ever see this grade truly realized, but he is very good versus magic, potentially. He's got huge overlap with the Pierce and Sword Red Mage jobs, and he's a top-tier water unit, all things considered. The passive abilities here, I'm going to go with a B+ here. Great passives, but I do wish there was some agility or movement ones. But the ones that he does have aren't the worst ones in the world. He's got two pretty good ones. The counter abilities, going with a C+ here. Very short range main counter. It's half decent if you're theory crafting, but the counters really aren't all that good in his kit. The overall jobbing kit, though, great main job abilities. He's super versatile, good utility. The sub-jobs are kind of underwhelming, in my opinion. I don't love what he has, but all things considered, he brings a lot of things to the table that water element and pierce element needed. So the overall jobbing kit is a B+, for a final grade of an A-. He's going to be a staple unit in a variety of teams. Immense amount of brawl potential. He's got some great impenetrable resist, defense pen potential. The base stats, as we saw, are definitely there. All of those things are key things to consider, like lasting upside for how a character can do. But as we get to the general thoughts, the defense pen options are there. Ultros is a huge factor in this because Ultros Esper gives you up to 20 defense pen extra. His Lancer Lore, Trick Lancer Lore passive gives 40. A Truststone passive could give you another 10. His Lion's Drain ability, which is that main ability that is a kind of like a calculated rend, will give 40 defense pen for 3 turns. Or the attack set bonus Truststone, which I don't always recommend, gives another 10. The bottom line is you have a lot of different ways to get to acceptable levels of defense penetration. And we'll circle back on this as to why that's super important. Now, he does have crazy great brawl potential, obviously an enormous health pool, the extra healing power, the great impenetrable resists, the absorption on some of his abilities. Overall, I like what he can do there, in addition to how much AoE res he has in terms of like moving along with a party from an AoE perspective. And to my opinion, he's a necessary unit for Water and Pierce. He's got a reliable barrier break, which both of those classes truly need. Water in particular is very sparse for their barrier break potential. Even Pierce is very limited for what they can do. He's got a 15% physical damage up aura that he can give to teammates, which again, when you consider Pierce damage, it's really good. It's not amazing though, but that's certainly a nice thing to kind of put the cherry on top of their damage. His limit break is a 60% attack buff and aura and 60% accuracy to anyone around him. It's also a 38% pierce and peril, so when you talk about amplifying the people around him, he's a really great unit to help do that. Now, he also has great overall meta versatility. In addition to the unit and AoE resistance, he's got a 5k general barrier, certainly nice to see. Great strike, magic, and slash resistance potential, as we'll see in my build in the end. And he's got no missile resistance like we saw, but the honeycomb effect that gives you that 10% might as well be 10% missile resistance, if you know what I mean, to some degree. So although it's not there, definitely a nice extra wrinkle in things. He has great accuracy upside potential when you equip both passives of 25%, makes him, again, a top 5 most accurate unit in the game. He can do that, though, because of the defense penetration options that when you figure Lancer Lore passive, one of the great things about this ability, I don't like characters that get their penetrations from a buff, because that means the buff can wear off, it can be dispelled, and then you will not typically rebuff mid-fight, you'll just keep attacking. But when you get these kind of penetrations on offensive abilities, think of Sephiroth with Hell's Gate and the slash res pen, that's so good because the amount of uptime that lasts throughout the battle almost makes it kind of permanent, and even if someone dispels it, you can get it right back without ever changing your AI. So, the fact that he has Lion's Drain that gives him 40 for 3 turns, if you went Ultros for another 20 and the Truststone passive for 10 and did not use the passive for 40, these 3, Ultros, the Truststone passive, and Lion's Drain, that's 70 defense pen. That's totally acceptable amount of defense pen. Now, as I mentioned, his main ability also has a 30% increased hit rate, and Summer Glaciora has that 40% accuracy buff too. All things considered, some great accuracy upside, even though he does not have any guaranteed hit in his kit. Now, also an exceptional amount of rainbow potential due to the Pierce Vision cards. He's got enough innate stats that he can thrive in a variety of places that you put him in. Now, we're going to go through briefly the passive abilities here, because we already talked to death about a lot of them. Determined to protect Leonis, and I apologize, this is all translated from WOTV Calc, which is not updated yet, but this one, 12% HP, 15 AoE res, 24% attack, 25 accuracy. This is on all the time. Definite. Trick Lancer's lore, which is the second one here, I do think is a really good viable second option for 80% of situations. I think both these together are all you ever really need. It's really during those evade metas, in my opinion, that the other Trick Lancer passive here is worth it, where you get the extra accuracy. Fun little thing here, Confusion and Stun, coincidentally, are what Winter Wrath and Vivi are thrown out for status effects at the moment too, so you want to get rid of some of that Vivi stun potential. Also not a bad passive. So again, all of these I like. Even Righteous Military Might's not the worst one. I could see some good stuff here if you wanted to mix and matches, but I'm okay with these two that I already talked about to kick things off. Now for the counter abilities, this is a tough one. Bite Back, I think I like the best, but not by much. Number one, 30% chance to proc is very low in this game nowadays. Only 2 squares away, also very limited. But here's a really cool and interesting thing. The way this works is kind of like the Dragons or the Dragoons ability, where you siphon health based upon the amount of damage you take. And basically the way it works is the amount of damage you receive will increase the amount of health you absorb. So you take the amount of damage you receive. There is a modifier, and this works just like the follow-up attacks that Bartz has, that Irvine has, that this absorb HP is a 50% or 50 mod, if you want to think of it that way. So add your human killer into that. And then you're going to look at enemy unit res. And this is a typeless attack. It's not a pierce attack, so it's only going to look at unit res, will not look at defense, will not look at pierce res. And so he's going to do some damage back to them, and you have the bravery mod. And once he does that damage, he'll also absorb however much damage he did, plus extra because of the healing power. And so the bottom line is, if he's taking large chunks of damage, and this happens to proc mid-fight and he damages someone back, he's likely going to regenerate that health back, plus some. So I think I like this the best, because honestly, I think the other ones are kind of whatever. I don't like these any more or less than what this one has to offer. That's why C+ for a grade. Now for the main job, the teammate buff, which we'll talk about first here. A lot of attributes here. It's the 20 AoE res, re-raise to self, 20% physical damage buff to himself. It's that honeycomb barrier as well, and 10% AP restore, so some good AP management there. The second buff, which is the self buff, is the HP barrier, and it's a aura ability for teammates that it's an extra 15% physical damage to those teammates within that aura area. So both of these really strong buffs. The main job here, 4 different abilities. The main one here is really Lion's Drain. That is almost like the King Bradley shape type attack here. It's a physical barrier break, it's a double hit, it's 40 defense pen for 3 turns. It's also a 30% extra hit chance and absorbs 30% of the damage done, and it's actually more than 30% because he has extra healing power innately. But in addition to that, Lion's Threat is a great one. It's this kind of like cross-shaped one, and the thing that's nice about this is that should people not line up perfectly for Lion's Drain, the Lion's Threat, like, perfectly compensates for the squares that he couldn't hit with Lion's Drain. So the bottom line is he's going to alternate potentially between these depending on enemy positioning. But even this one, the decreased CT of 25%, we've seen Bridal Elia, just how potent that is. It's an excellent other ability. And Spear of Solution is one of my favorite types because it's an arcing type shot that it will dispel courage to whoever it hits. I know Shadow Lynx, Winter Shadow Lynx, or whatever, on ice, has an ability similar, and I've seen really good things with it. I also have similar upside hopes for this when it comes to courage removal. Now for the Limit Break, this is a 38% Pierce and Peril, technically an AoE ability. Will also be a giant aura effect though for people around him that will restore 200 in CT to himself and allies, a 60% attack buff to himself and allies, and a 60% accuracy buff to himself and allies. So this is a very, very strong Limit Break overall. Obviously going to help turn the tides with everyone getting that CT mid-fight and all the damage that goes with it, and the extra reliability of hitting enemies with the extra accuracy there. Now for the sub-job, this is where things I'm kind of whatever on. Young Lion Fang is okay. I mean, it's a 25% chance to disable. He's not a high faith unit. I'm not worried about this. Spear of Destruction I don't hate. Again, it's a very unique AoE style. Decreases AP of 15. I don't mind this one. I don't know if it's enough to equip the sub-job though, but there's really not that much better of options either, because you also have the Paladin sub-job here. Now here's what I like about the Paladin sub-job. Nothing. This sub job is absolutely useless in my opinion. Literally does nothing to amplify anything in his kit. The AI will never use any of these slash type abilities. I don't like anything here. Maybe Sentinel as a like third priority buff if you're on a really long map that he gets all this defense and spirit for one turn, but man, that's a reach. Because other than that, Trick Lancer here, immobilizing Javelin or whatever the main ability there is. Again, the translation is pretty jank. I don't hate this ability. It's 5 squares away, so I think the AI will be smart about prioritizing this versus the Rend ability. And so I like that extra utility of the immobilize. In particular, the healing power down is really the best thing there. But the rest of this job, again, some overlap here with AP Break Lance from what we already saw. I don't like the teammate buff here, and Trick Thrust I think is inferior to the main job low AP ability. So the sub jobs are kind of lacking. I don't have a favorite yet because I don't think any of them really do anything to amplify his kit, but I think Trick Lancer is the one I'm starting off with. Now for the TMR, this is an armor type of TMR. 13 defense, almost 500 HP. It's got 2 casts on it. It's 25 pierce attack, so obviously very much spear oriented. It's also a dispel haste for 3 turns on the unit who activates it, and it's a CT restore of 250. Honestly, not the worst TMR. Very niche though. Obviously A, because it's an armor type, and obviously B, because the pierce attack is a major offensive contributor here. The dispel haste you can get for some other TMRs. It doesn't have to be this one. And the CT is really nice, but again, just super niche for who might be able to use it. Now for the job-based vision cards, this is where the greatest upside of Spear is at the moment. There are so many vision cards that do have AoE, unit res, and the agility ones, although they're not all here, it actually isn't the end of the world because there's a lot of good, universal agility vision cards. But, Sword Red Mage is a primo one to line up here. Staff Devout is also an exceptional class to overlap with. Mace is certainly another one here, these 3 different types, and even Dagger and Axe to a degree has some good upside there. And so yeah, when we look at the Pierce type cards, obviously as we just mentioned, a lot of potential overlap. But yeah, 4 different unit res cards, 2 area res cards, 1 agility card. I think Pierce, we've felt this way for a while. Pierce is like 1 unit away from being a really good powerhouse team to just bring to a variety of content. And I think that's it. Now, I don't think they're about to dominate Guild War by any means. But when you talk about like some of these class match, quick pick, limited Guild War, heck, even regular Guild War on attack for targeting specific things, I do think Pierce has some potency that is going to start to come into its own, kind of the same way Strike did. And we'll get to a spot where then we start seeing some extra Pierce res. We're already seeing it with A2, who was just released. But yeah, overall good things for their future potential just because of the amount of vision cards here. Now for the weapon optimization, I actually am still deciding this. The Lion's Roar, the unique main one he gave him, is reaction block rate of 30. It's the AoE res of 15 when your health is above 70%, and pierce attack 15. This is honestly a great weapon. That AoE resistance, though, is really, for me, when you're in a team that has to self-sustain to get himself constantly above those levels where, sure, you might fall below it, but he should hopefully absorb enough damage to bring himself back up, or maybe some healing externally to bring himself back up so that you're constantly maintaining that 15 AoE res to a degree. Because if you're not doing that, I actually think the Platinum Lance, it might be the best spear here, where this is similarly also 30 reaction block rate and 15 pierce attack. It's got the same attributes, except it also has 10 crit damage for free and 20 initial AP, where obviously the AP is a great free value. The crit damage is certainly nice for what he does as a crit rate unit. That you're giving up the AoE res, sure, but there's some really nice offensive capabilities about this weapon as well. I do think the honorable mention is the Dragon Whisker, just for the amount of accuracy it brings innately with 20 on the weapon and another 20 in the box. There is that extra, AoE in parallel, and he does have a great main AoE ability, as we saw. So I do like the Dragon Whisker for some of that, but I still need to play with some damage on all of these. I think the sweet spot, though, is probably the Lion's Roar, just because of where I think his Brawl upside is, but there's some options for sure. And we talk about the sample builds. So again, WOTV Calc does not have the updates at the moment, so I tried to build this out. It's not great, but I got good news. I already have him 140 in the game today. This is a team I literally already put together, and so I can tell you exactly what stats he has. And so the Truststone set that I have on him, we'll actually revisit in just a second, so you don't have to read this for too long. But for right now, the in-game screenshot for what I have, he's crossed that 12,000 HP threshold. 1700 attack already, 41 defense, 28 spirit, 110 agility, certainly very, very nice, 514 dexterity, and for unit res, he's got 55, and AoE res, he's got 64. Again, some of that's being driven by the weapon, so that AoE res might be closer to 50 if you do a different one. And same thing for the unit res, he's getting 8 from the Azure Dragon armor. But yeah, just from a conceptual build perspective, you do still have some flexibility here. All these yellow vision cards, you could certainly play with other ones. You know, you could decide to put the Miranda vision card in the main slot instead, which gives them the lightning res if you really were worried about some lightning matchups. Probably preferred, quite honestly. But I know this other one, the Dark Siren, does have some good human killer, the strike res, so it's got a different kind of survivability built into it. The Astrologer subvision card here, I went purely for A, the attack percent buff, where all these characters are physical damage dealers. The acquired AP, also certainly very nice. It's also, in this subslot, 10% magic resistance. That's the water effect of that card, so good timing of the magic resistance there. But it also has, I'll bring it up for a second, the special ability here of the decreased defense for 3 turns. Now, I don't think this ability is amazing, because it's only 121% apparel, but it's a defense break, all things considered, and he is a spear type class, so I actually think this vision card lines up really well for all the kinds of things he wants to do. And then for the Tidus vision card that's down here, this says crit damage on it, and it's got HP percent on it. That's really why I threw it in here, to really bring the extra bulk to this team. Obviously, the slash attack certainly helps Faris and Glassy. Doesn't really help Eld in this instance, but the rest of the stats do. And so when you look at the resistances, drilling down a little bit deeper here, this build has 79% magic resistance, 27% strike res, 17 slash, 7% missile, not including the honeycomb barrier damage reduction. The element resists are okay, but I have a sleep Truststone on him for 25%, so that puts the sleep res to 75%. He is basically never getting slapped by enemy Helena. He can nullify Berserk at the moment. And that's only part of the Azure Dragon armor too, that for 3 turns, you get the extra Berserk res, but he has 50 innately, but the 50% charm res for 3 turns, that'll fade, and the 25% poison res is from Ultros. So there's a lot of really good meta status effects here that, he, being at 50 faith, which my recommendation is, he can just kind of shrug off no big deal and probably not get hurt by much of it. Now, just for the Truststones, this is where things get maybe a smidge more tricky, because I think the defense pen is really the one that you have to play with. I do think at the minimum you should try to keep the Pierce res penetration in here. So for now, my recommendation is the attack 20%, the Pierce res 10. I think another great stone would be the water attack 10 and the healing power 10. Definitely put the healing power in there. And lastly, the acquired AP of 20% and the dex 15%. The acquired AP you might be able to do without, because he's got the AP regen on his ability. And the only other ones I'd consider are the defense pen 10, which again is a must for most times. Really depends on if you have Ultros or not, what you're equipping for passives. And then the crit rate and crit damage. But again, some of these spears have crit rate and crit damage on them. So you have to be a little smarter with your equipment for him for the Truststone min-maxing. But generally speaking, if you're around 4 out of these 6, you're in a good spot already. But that's the Young Eld character review, all things considered. It's a really great character, honestly. You know, he's a permanent pull unit, so I don't think a lot of people are going to take the Viz gamble of going for him and pulling the Hollow Vision card. But as the game goes on, he is going to be a very, very good unit. And I'm excited to do some showcases with him. So that's it for now. Thanks for watching. I'll talk to you all soon.